Welcome to my tutorial for Jaws for the NES. This is a very short game, but it can be a little bit tricky. It is kind of bullshitty towards the end of the game, but I'll try to break everything down. You're going to get these random RPG-like encounters where you just randomly get taken down to the ocean and you have to fight a bunch of jellyfish and stingrays most of the time. Sometimes baby sharks. So basically what you're going to do is you want to kill these guys and try to collect as many of the shells as you can get. The shells are going to be your currency that you use to upgrade your power level. See where it says power in the middle of the screen on the bottom and shells to the left of that? Those are going to be what you're going to look for. You want to get your shells up and then you can start purchasing power levels from the docks. So that's pretty much your first goal. It starts off easy with the jellyfish and stingrays, but the control is a little slippery with moving your divers, so you do slide almost like you're on ice. So that does make it easy to hit in this shit. But later the jellyfish will start to move diagonally, which makes it a lot harder. And basically once you get to these underground areas, these swimming portions, depending on the patterns of the enemies, you can tell if it's going to be a hard pattern or an aggressive pattern, especially with the jellyfish. Mainly it's the jellyfish that you're going to be looking for. If the jellyfish are moving diagonally and there's a lot of them, then you're probably not going to want to focus on collecting shells at all. You're probably just going to want to try to survive. So, keep that in mind when you decide to grab the shells, if it's worth it, because some patterns, the jellyfish will hit you off screen, or they'll come up right on you when you're at the bottom of the ocean floor trying to grab the shells. They'll just hit you instantly and kill you, because it's one-hit death. So when it's a slow-moving, easy stage like this, it's easy enough to collect the shells, and the jellyfish won't come up from the bottom and hit you, from what I've seen. The small baby shark, you just put a bunch of spears into them, and they die very fast. They usually always give you a shell. These bonus scenes, you can fail them. It doesn't really matter, but if you do well in them, you earn nice little packs of shells. Like you can get 5 shells or more from doing well in this bonus stage. So it is worth it. It does speed things up if you can do well. You want to try to hit as many of those jellyfish as you can. You can speed up the plane by holding left or right, depending which direction you're facing. Holding the direction behind the plane will slow it down, and if you hold the direction in front of the plane, it will speed it up. So just keep that in mind, and you can just drop cannonballs and try to hit as many as you can. If you can get them in a row, it makes it easier to hit a bunch of them. But here for getting 22 hits, I got 7 shells, so it was a decent little group of shells. So now I'm heading towards the first dock. I haven't made it there yet because I get these random encounters. Now this is in the shallow water, which I think it's random whether or not you get shallow water or not, unless it has something to do with being close to a surface. That I'm not sure about, but these shallow ones are the most dangerous because there's very little room to move. This is an easy one, but when you get a shallow one with aggressive diagonal moving jellyfish and sharks, it's a bad situation. So try to get into this this first dock. You're going to get the receiver. And the receiver is going to allow you to, it's going to beep when you're close to Jaws. It's really kind of useless, but you have to pay for it. So, you can't skip it. So then go to the next dock. You just keep alternating docks. Like you go to that one, then you got to go back to the other one. Now you can get your power level up to power 2 by spending some shells. Now to get the next power level, you got to, of course, go back again to the other dock. So you're just going to keep going back and forth and spending shells. Now here's the first encounter we get with Jaws. If the fin touches your ship, you fight Jaws. Something to know about Jaws is that if you're all the way up at the top of the screen, at the top of the water, he cannot hurt you. The other enemies can, though, but Jaws cannot hurt you if you're all the way up at the top of the screen. I think the baby shark also can't hurt you if you're all the way up at the top. So you can try to grab some shells if you want, because you're not going to take down Jaws with a power level of 2. Now if you have a power level of at least 3, it is kind of feasible to do it. But it's probably going to take a few Jaws encounters to get his health down. It's kind of a waste of time. So I recommend not even trying to take Jaws down until you have a power level of at least 5. I usually wait until I have a power level of 6 because it's faster. But once you have 5, it's fine. Now, if you do get killed, your power level goes down by 1 if you lose a life. Your shells are cut in half. And you lose the receiver that tracks Jaws. So, even though the receiver is a useless item, you end up having to pay for it again since the game makes you buy it before you can start upgrading your power level. So you'll have to buy the receiver again. So it's going to be extra wasted trips and shit like that. It's definitely waste your time if you lose a life. I edited out one death that I had, and I also edited out my unsuccessful attempt at trying to stab Jaws. So just, if you want to see the full raw version, it's about 21 minutes long, and that shows some of my fuck-ups. Actually, I think I left the death in this video to show how the game works, but I did edit down the part where, where I messed up trying to stab Jaws, because that took a long-ass time. I was waiting for the perfect positioning, and the shark was not cooperating with me at all. So I wasted minutes on that. But I'll try to explain the positioning. That's the hardest part of the game. This is all easy, but it's not always that easy when you get the aggressive jellyfish. This is a very easy pattern right here, where it's just the enemies moving, the jellyfish are just moving straight up, no diagonal movement. Whenever you get that, just go all out and try to get as many shells as you can, because it's a very easy pattern. And occasionally you do get these bonus stages where you can rack up some more shells. I'm not sure what triggers them. Also, I didn't get it in this playthrough, but occasionally you're going to see an orange thing floating on the surface of the water in the overhead map. When you see that, go to it and you'll get a submarine, which I believe moves faster, shoots more frequently, and it may allow you to take an extra hit. So definitely grab that if you see that. I'm not sure how you make it appear. I think it's kind of random because I've seen it appear before when I was just playing normally. So I have a pretty good amount of shells already. The power levels are not too expensive to get, except for, I think the 9th one costs 10 shells. That's the most expensive one. But a lot of them are only like maybe 4 shells or something like that. Maybe 8, I'm not sure. But they're usually not super expensive. So here's where the jellyfish start moving diagonally, and they seem a little bit more aggressive. You got to watch out for that if you're trying to grab shells off the bottom especially. Because of the slippery control, you can easily slide into them. And, one hit, and then you lose a power level, which wastes a lot of your time. And, half of your shells, and then you got to get the receiver again and pay for that. So it's a pain in the ass if you get hit. So you really don't want to get hit. There's not a lot of enemies here, so this is a pretty slow one, but you still have to be careful. The baby sharks are extremely easy because they'll swim directly to you, and you can just pelt them with the spears. Just rapidly mash it, and they'll go right into it and die. And they usually give you a shell too, so it's a good way to get a shell. If you see Jaws, you can fire at them, but it's kind of a waste at power level too. You're better off just floating around and shooting other shit. Maybe try to grab some shells. A lot of times it comes down to assessing if you want how much of a risk you want to deal with when grabbing the shells. If it's a dangerous, if you get a dangerous spawn where the enemies are more aggressive, you may not even want to try, especially if you're in shallow water. You may just want to try to survive. So you gotta determine it, what risk you want to take. Whenever I see the jellyfish, floating straight up with no diagonal movement, I know that's going to be an easy round. So I usually try to get as many shells as possible when I see that. The main thing that I'll try to explain is poking Jaws. But the way this game works, you can take out Jaws pretty much at any time. You may even be able to take him out at power level 1 if you really waited a long time. But I don't think so, because he probably will heal himself a little bit every time you fight him and he leaves. So I think you may at least need a power level of 3 to be able to slowly take down his health. And it'll probably take many encounters to do that. It'd be a huge pain in the ass at power level 3. But the game does allow you to beat it very early. So it is a pretty unique game. The concept is actually pretty cool, how you can take out the boss early if you're powerful enough and you know what you're doing. I like the concept of the game, but the game is pretty sloppy. It is one of LJN's better games, but that's not saying much. The main bullshit part, though, is the very end. The rest of the game is just very tedious and boring. It's not necessarily, that bad. It's just very tedious and boring. And then the last sequence is kind of bullshitty with very, very precise positioning required. It's extremely anal about how you have to be positioned to stab the shark. So what I did was I used saved and load states to practice the positioning. And then I had a good chance of getting it, but I still fucked up multiple times. But at least I knew what I was trying to do. So I'm going to suggest practicing with save and load states to master the position of the shark, to poke it, and get the ending. But I'll explain it a little bit more. This was a game that I have about 7 or 8 games on my games beaten list. I keep a list of all the games I've beaten that are not legitimate because I use save and load states to speed up the process or cheat in some way. And there's only about 7 or 8 games on that list that need to be legitimized again. And this was one of those games. I got sick of doing the shark poking sequence. So back then I made a save state at that part and I just beat it. And I didn't feel like going back, so I just wrote it down. I was less strict back then about some of the games, and I let a few slide through on my games beaten list. So this was one of those games that I had to go back and re-legitimize. There's a few more that I'll be doing soon. And a lot of them are pretty easy or moderate games. They're not really that hard. Except for Super Ghouls and Ghosts for Super Nintendo. I have to do those final bosses with that shitty weapon that you get on the second round where you have to play through the game a second time with a bad weapon. So I did cheat on that part years ago with save states. That's a game I have to redo to legitimize. I removed all those games from my games beaten list. So they're not on there anymore except for a section of games that I need to legitimize. So I'm going to try to work through those eventually. So here we get power level 5, which is all you really need. I do end up going for an extra power level, but it's completely unneeded. But this was my first time beating it in recent years, so I didn't remember exactly what was a good power level. This took me about an hour and 18 minutes to beat on my attempts today, just playing it for the first time in years. I don't remember how much time I spent on it back then, but it was easy except for that main bullshit issue with the poking the shark at the end. So yeah, here I'm going to end up dying from a jellyfish. It doesn't look like it should be that difficult, and it's really not that difficult, but the control is so slippery. You just really slide around. Also, collecting crabs. If you collect the crabs when you kill an enemy, you get a diver's speed increase. So you'll be able to swim faster. That's another thing worth mentioning. I noticed that if I got too many of them, I moved a little bit too fast, and the control got really, really slippery, so I almost recommend not even getting them to speed up your character, because it kind of makes the control even worse. So it is optional. You really don't need it. So yeah, I died there, and you see my power level went down to 5, and my shells, I believe, were cut in half. I don't think I had many left anyway, but... So now I'm going to take down the shark with a power level of 5. So remember, staying all the way up at the water, the shark cannot hurt you, but the other enemies can kill you still. So now at power level 5, it's very easy, because the shark, just like the baby sharks, it always swims towards you. So you can just pelt it with tons and tons of spears. And don't worry about collecting shells if you already have a power level of 5. Just focus on taking down the shark now and trying to beat the game. But you're probably not going to beat it until you use save and load states to really practice the positioning of stabbing the shark in the final sequence. So you really need to practice that. Otherwise, you're just going to be wasting your time. If you fail the shark poking sequence, you do keep everything. You don't lose power level or anything, but the shark gets all its health back, and then you got to fight it again. Which is easy at power level 5. You see this is not difficult, but you still got to keep redoing it until you're able to poke the shark properly. You get 3 attempts at poking the shark, 3 strobes that you can use to poke the shark on each run. But you can earn more strobes if you max out your power level at 9. You can then go back to one of the other docks. You alternate docks to use them, every other dock, and you can then buy strobes for extra chances, I believe. But now I'm going to show how to properly stab the shark. You want the tail to be... You want to line up the tail with that first line. You see that first line going from the bottom of the screen and moving up. You see how there's a blue line? You want to use your strobe when that tail is at the base. you want the tail to be lined up so that the base of the tail is lined up with that first line almost perfectly. You also have to be centered with the tail. And then you use your strobe, which is the A button. It'll make the shark rise out of the water, and then you hit B to poke the shark. And if you position it perfectly, you'll get the stab and beat the game, but it's extremely anal. So you're going to want to practice that and maybe even slow the video down to half speed on YouTube and try to see exactly where I make the shark rise up at. Because you got to be perfectly in the center of it pretty much, and you have to get it to rise when the base of the tail is lined up perfectly with that line. That's when I seem to get it the most. And I've done it pretty damn perfectly before, and it still wasn't good enough. So it's very fucking anal. But if you know that positioning, you have a much better chance of getting it. If you're trying to shoot for that positioning, you'll have a real good chance of getting it. Let me know if you have any questions, and thanks for watching.